You're listening to the AAF Analyzed podcast with your hosts, Derek Heid and Garrett Lay.
Hello and welcome. You are listening to AAF Analyzed Week 2 Preview. As
Yes,
always, I'm Derek Heid, alongside me, Garrett Lay. Before we get started, don't forget, if you are listening on YouTube, to like and subscribe. If you're on Soundcloud, to give us a follow and like it. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, subscribe and leave us a review.
A 5-star one.
We love you guys. The support has been absolutely fantastic so far, and we really want to keep it up. One last thing that we mentioned in the outro, but not very much during the show, is that you guys can ask us questions to be featured on the show. If you guys email us or DM us on Twitter, we will answer your questions on the show. So
We'll answer them, begrudgingly, but we will answer them. And we'll pretend to be enthused. That's for sure.
That is not true at all.
No, we'd love your questions. We really would. Of course, speaking of Twitter, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at AAF Analyzed to keep up with all the latest news and episode release announcements and ask us some questions. And keep an eye on the Twitter and sign up for the giveaway because we will be picking a winner on Saturday. Depending on when you're listening to this, whether it's Friday morning, afternoon, evening, or maybe even Saturday morning, you might still have a little bit of time, but I'm probably going to pick the winner around 12 p.m. on Saturday before that first game.
That would be Eastern time.
Yes, Eastern time. I forgot. Everyone's listening everywhere. So, yeah, 12 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure you retweet and tag your two friends and give us a follow before that so you can win your free AAF gear.
Yep. One of the main questions that a lot of people have been asking us, Garrett, is kind of where we get our fantasy info.
Mm-hmm.
So mainly we play on altsportsfantasy.com. They make really great season-long stuff.
There's also noextrapoints.com, which gives you all sorts of stats from all of the games. It's all the box scores and stuff.
Yeah.
We follow him on Twitter, the guy who made that website. That's an excellent website to look at. I'm going to mention later in this episode PFF_AFF on Twitter as well. They do like those, the Pro Football Focus, like scores they do for the NFL, but they have that for the AAF now.
That's cool.
And that's really excellent. So I do some of my research there, and then just generally on Twitter and things like that. That's where I find a lot of my fantasy stuff for the projections.
Yep, we combine kind of the info we get from all of these places around into one main thing, and that would be what you're listening to.
Yes, and our, of course, massive football IQs also play a big role.
Yes, massive. So without further ado, we're going to get on to the games before Garrett starts talking about his football IQ some more.
Well, I mean, you should be talking about your football IQ.
No.
Okay.
First game of the weekend, Salt Lake at Birmingham. That game is Saturday, February 16th at 2 p.m., and that will be the one and only AAF game on TNT.
TNT.
I guess there's not a basketball game for them to show that night or that afternoon.
That afternoon.
So they're going to Salt Lake and Birmingham, and that should be a pretty good game. Salt Lake did have a pretty good showing against Arizona last Sunday night, and Birmingham, of course, put up the first shutout in AAF history against Memphis.
Yeah, so speaking of that shutout, my first key to the game here for Salt Lake is they need to start fast if they're going to want to win this one. The Iron defense is going to be absolutely dripping with swagger after pitching a shutout last week. I saw a player quoted talking about how confident they were going into that game and how amazingly confident they are coming out of that game with a shutout. So Salt Lake's going to have to score quick to knock that defense back down to size, or the Iron might come out of this with another smothering victory.
Oh, that's I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, that's really what I think should happen. If even like a field goal right on their first drive would be big. I mean, a touchdown would be huge just to put the defense back in their place. But if that defense comes out flying to the ball like they were against the Express, the Salt Lake Stallions are in for a struggle. So my second key to the game here is who's going to be starting at quarterback for Salt Lake. After going down in the third quarter last week with a hamstring injury, Woodrum was out of his pads pretty quick. You told me that, and that seems to point to a sign that it might be a serious injury. It'll be interesting to see that if he plays at all, and if so, how much. Hamstring injuries can be nagging, as we saw in the NFL this season with a lot of players with hamstring injuries like Leonard Fournette. He tried to come back game after game, but he never could get to full speed. And Salt Lake is going to want to ease their quarterback back into it, so I wouldn't be surprised if Linehan gets some playing time or starts.
Yeah, that's very true. I brought it up in the recap episode, but we really have to ask who's this quarterback going to be, because that's going to be a big factor in this game, because Salt Lake is a completely different team with Linehan under center as compared to Woodrum. Both quarterbacks have put up similar numbers in that game. They got fair time. Each of them got one half a play, and they both threw a touchdown and an interception. But Woodrum passed the ball 9 more times in that amount of time, which means that offense just plays a lot more open with Woodrum. They give him more chances to succeed. And with that, Woodrum scored 16 points when he was on offense against a really tough Arizona defense. But when Linehan stepped in, the Stallions were only able to score 6. So if you look just off of the point score, Woodrum's already a 10-point difference over Linehan.
Yeah, Linehan did show some flashes, but I think, and maybe like having a week of practice, if he's the one practicing right now as they rest Woodrum, it might really help him out. But you are right. Their offense does look different, and they play a lot differently when Woodrum is under center. So it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully what it was just Woodrum hadn't been playing that much football, and he ended up just tweaking it, and he'll be able to come back at least maybe some of this week, maybe play the first half this week, or start the week after this. But hopefully it isn't a nagging injury, because that could really hurt the Stallions.
I can't imagine that with Woodrum's injury, he's getting a lot of practice reps in.
Yeah.
I'd assume that they would want him to kind of ease off, kind of give him some days to rest and see if he'll be good to go for the game. But Linehan's got to be getting first-team reps at practice, and that's definitely going to help him moving forward.
Yeah, so my third key of the game here for this time for the Iron, it's going to be, can Trent Richardson dominate again like he did against the Express? He did only average 2.5 yards a carry last week, but he had over 20 carries, and he ended up with 2 touchdowns on some really powerful runs. And he was just carrying the ball all game. But he has to watch out for Mike Purcell. He was an excellent defensive lineman for the Stallions, and so look for him to try to disrupt Richardson. But I think if Richardson can take over again, the Iron should be feeling pretty good about this game.
Yeah, Richardson was an absolute force in Week 1 against Memphis. 2 touchdowns. It definitely made whoever drafted him look very smart. And it's just going to be some more of the same for the Iron this week. Hopefully for them, at least.
Mm-hmm.
If you move over again to that Iron offense and who's under center, you gotta look at the Patton-Perez connection. Quentin Patton is the wide receiver for the Iron. This duo connected for 107 yards in that opening game, and both players looked absolutely stellar. From watching that game, I was immediately attracted to Quentin Patton's hands, the routes he was running, and Luis Perez was throwing it right on the money every time. And according to CBS Sports, Luis Perez has reportedly already been contacted by 8 different NFL teams following his Week 1 performance. So if that's not telling you he's a great quarterback, I don't know what will.
Yeah, I know that Wolford had the excellent game last week, and he really drew all the attention for in terms of quarterbacks in the AAF. But I think Perez has some of the best touch on a ball. Like, I saw him making some great deep throws. I think the Iron published like a highlight reel of him making some nice throws on Twitter. And just in terms of the throws he was able to connect with Patton down the field, he really almost impressed me the most with just the touch he can throw on the ball and where he can put it.
Yeah, Luis Perez was absolutely making NFL throws in that game against Memphis, and he made Memphis look terrible. And if Memphis comes out this week and they surprise us, I think that just kind of shows more as to how good Luis Perez really is. And as for me, that number one key to victory, it's got to be Luis Perez, not just that connection he has with Quentin Patton. That Stallions defense is coming off of a rough game, to say the least. They gave up 275 yards and 4 touchdowns to John Wolford, a guy who, let me give him a lot of credit. He looked very good, but no one thought he would be the starter during training camp.
He came out of nowhere.
Yeah. And we've been over how good Perez looked in that game against Memphis. And if that success translates to this game against a defense that looked particularly worse, the Stallions could be in for a very long day.
Yeah, it's going to be a long day for the Stallions defense, but I think the defense that isn't going to have the long day is going to be the Iron. And that's why what my player to watch for this game is going to be the Iron cornerback, Jamar Summers. He was excellent in coverage, and he came down with a pick last week. I wouldn't be surprised to see him match up against the Stallions' Kenny Bell and try to shut him down. He's going to play whatever wide receiver is playing the number one spot this week for the Stallions, so he is going to be excellent in coverage.
Yeah, that the big story's got to be whoever's under center for the Stallions playing up against the Iron defense, and that's why I'm looking at Iron linebacker Jonathan Massaquoi. Massaquoi's coming off of a game against the Express where he had 5 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 QB hits, and no matter who's under the center for the Stallions, they'll be watching out for number 57 in black.
Yeah, this Iron defense is way scarier than I thought they were going to be at the beginning of the year. I thought they were going to be solid, and I mean, with a name like the Iron, you kind of expect them to be good on defense, but they are really, really hot right now. So moving into potential fantasy stars, I know we just talked about him for like 5 minutes, but my fantasy star for this game, it's going to be Luis Perez. Great game against the Stallions, excellent throws deep down the field, and like you were saying, after what Wolford was able to do with the Stallions last week, Perez looks like a very safe start at quarterback, and luckily, I have him on my team.
Lucky you. Lucky you. My fantasy star of the week for this game has to be Quentin Patton. Last Sunday, the Stallions let Rashad Ross run all over them. Ross had an incredible game, and this game is just another deadly quarterback-wide receiver duo. And look out for Patton because he had a good game against Memphis last week, and he didn't even get a touchdown. So if Patton gets a touchdown plus another 100 yards, you better look out for him.
Yeah, I am kind of embarrassed. I thought the Stallions secondary was going to be a lot stronger than they were. I was talking about how them and the Hotshots maybe had some of the best secondaries in the league, but right now that doesn't look to be correct. So really anytime so far it's looking like if you have somebody playing against that secondary, start them in fantasy. So my prediction for this game, I'm going to be going with the Iron 24, Salt Lake 16. Coming off a huge win last week, the Iron look like they're going to keep rolling here, and particularly with that uncertainty at quarterback for the Stallions, this looks like it is the Iron's game to lose.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Even though I have Iron last place in the Eastern Conference,
our rankings are not looking
hot.
Predictions.
I really thought that Salt Lake looked like a strong team against Arizona, but without Woodrum under center, they just looked really underprepared and flat out bad. Even if Woodrum plays, I highly doubt he's at 100%, and that Stallions defense was killed by the Hotshots. So because of all those that I just listed, I got Iron 30, Salt Lake 15.
Yep. All right. So next up, we have on Saturday, Arizona at the Memphis Express, February 16th at 8 p.m. That game is going to be airing on NFL Network, so it is the big show. My game notes here, Memphis is getting a home game, and they seem really, really ready to bring football to their town. So I do expect their fans to show out, so that might give Memphis a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, you can really only hope that Express will put on a much better showing for their fans at home this time. And if there's one thing that the Express should be coming out to do, it would be to prove that Week 1 against the Iron was an absolute fluke. And the best way to do that would be to knock off the top team in the league at the moment in the Arizona Hotshots.
Speaking of the top team, my first key to the game here, the Hotshots are going to have to stay hot. They have the opportunity to go in and get another possibly easy win here, and that's going to be the problem for them, the fact that it is looking like it could be an easy win. If they play like they did last week, it's going to be an easy one, but they need to make sure not to underestimate a Memphis team that is sure to be working extra hard at practice this week. We, as Steeler fans, know what happens when you underestimate a team that you shouldn't lose to. You tie the Browns. So, yeah.
That happens 4 times a year. You get used to it. But this game for Memphis, or for Arizona, could be a potential trap game. And if the Hotshots go into this game thinking that they're just going to roll Memphis, they need to think again, because Memphis, these are still professional football players. These are still really good guys. Mike Singletary is still a good head coach, and they will hit you hard, and they will surprise you if you come out flat-footed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of Mike Singletary, though, One of my main keys to the game for this is that the play calling has to be better. The Memphis Express play calling left me extremely confused and dumbfounded at multiple times during that game. After another week of practice, Mike Singletary has to tighten up the normal plays in this playbook before he tries to throw hook and ladder plays in there and lining up Christian Hackenberg at wide receiver.
Yeah.
If he was to listen to me, I hope he's listening, he has to throw out those weird power sets when they are in the red zone ASAP. His quarterback was only sacked twice. Give him some freedom in the pocket and let him sling it.
Speaking of his quarterback, Christian Hackenberg, my key is he going to get it together to lead this offense? He's going to have to. They need something to get going here, or Zach Stacy is going to once again probably be the only bright spot for the Express on offense. So he's just going to have to get his feet under him. We can chalk it up to him not really playing that much. And, of course, he had to go out and play what seems to be one of the best defenses in the league right now. So that wasn't great for him to start with either. No. But he really has to figure out how to connect with his receivers and make plays from the pocket. Because, like you said, their offensive line isn't bad. He's getting time to throw the ball. He was only sacked twice, which in that opening week of the AAF is on the lower end.
That's hard to come by.
Yeah, it's on the lower end. So he has the time to throw it. He's just got to make those connections.
Yeah, Hackenberg, despite only being sacked twice, he only had 87 yards, still threw a pick, and got benched halfway through. So we don't even know if he's going to start next week. We assume he will.
It looks like he will, but yeah.
But another key for that Memphis offense has got to be how many touches are they going to give Zach Stacy? Zach Stacy was the only good thing to come out of Memphis last Sunday, so if the Express want to keep this game close, they got to give him more than 12 carries. He averaged over 4 yards a carry. The Hotshots gave up nearly 100 yards to the Stallions last week. If they want to be in this game, Zach Stacy has to be a major part.
And I know we're talking a lot about Memphis here, but I feel like the Hotshots should feel pretty secure. If they can shut down that run game, it looks like they're going to come out of this one with a win. But I would like to talk real quick a little bit more about Memphis and their Memphis defense. The defense had a very solid first half against the Iron, and they forced them to kick 3 field goals in that first half. If the defense is able to hold up for the whole game this time, led by linebacker DeMarcus Gates, who is currently leading the AAF in solo tackles with 10, they might stand a chance against the Hotshots' offensive onslaught, but as we saw against the Stallions, that's going to be really tough because the Hotshots run a super quick offense. Like, even with that short play clock, they're getting to the line and calling plays in like 20 seconds, and it really gasses the defense. Also, on the defensive side, Memphis is going to have to step it up in the secondary, and that's not looking easy against a red-hot John Wolford and Rashad Ross. They allowed a 100-yard receiver in Irons Quentin Patton, and they're going to, like I said, have to step up their game against the other 100-yard receiver last week, Rashad Ross, and he's able to even get in the end zone, which Patton wasn't able to do.
Yeah, the reason we're talking about Memphis so much in this game is because that Arizona team, I don't know about you, Garrett, but I didn't see a weakness.
I didn't either. They looked really strong all around.
Rashad Ross was incredible. John Wolford was incredible. Their running back, Jarrell Presley, looked very good as well. So basically the one point that we said of just staying hot covers the entire Arizona team going into this week. And
go ahead.
Well, like I said with the Memphis defense, is that Memphis defense is only going to stop that red-hot offense if they play like they did against the Iron in the first half. They did hold one of the better quarterbacks in the league, in Luis Perez, to 0 touchdowns.
That is a bright spot.
Yeah. So the Memphis defense, they only gave up field goals in that first half, and if they can do that again against Arizona, I feel like with another week of practice, maybe Memphis could come and shock us, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, so my player to watch here for this game, it's going to be Zach Stacy. While I personally wouldn't start him in fantasy, that's why he's just a player to watch. Because of the strength of the Hotshots line, they didn't give much to the Stallions' running game. They did allow 100 yards and a touchdown, but the touchdown was just a 4-yard carry by Matt Asiata, one of his only carries of the game. So if he can get going, I think he could give Hackenberg some time to get his feet under him and maybe open up that Memphis offense so that they don't have to run those crazy plays with the Wildcat and things like that. And he could end up being the best player on the Express this coming week, but he's going to be important to watch.
Yeah, player to watch, I would agree with you with Zach Stacy. He's really got the best chance for the Express to kind of break out. But I don't know how much money I'm going to put down that he will actually break out of that game.
Yeah.
So we'll see. You will quickly see that all of our potential fantasy stars in this game play for Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of expected after a team that gets shut out. I wouldn't recommend playing any of their any of their players on offense against a team that it has a really, really solid defense. So my first potential fantasy star for the Hotshots is going to be their running back, Jarrell Presley. Richardson had a dominant day against the Express last week, so look for the running back for the Hotshots to mimic that kind of production, particularly considering the fact that he also brings a great pass-catching ability to his game when he had that 30-yard receiving touchdown last week.
I'm also looking at the Hotshots defense. The Express did just come off of a goose egg, as we've said multiple times. And the Hotshots, they gave up under 150 yards passing and under 100 yards rushing at their game against the Stallions, who are a better team than Memphis. So if the Shots play with this speed again, you got to start the Hotshots defense.
Yeah, they're great. Same with going back to the offensive side of the ball for the Hotshots again. Rashad Ross, we talked about him earlier. He was an absolute beast against the Stallions, and he's looking to have another huge game against, as we've been saying over and over and over again, a team that gave up the other 100-yard receiver in Quentin Patton last week.
And simply put, John Wolford, how could you not start a man that's coming off of 275 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he's facing a team that lost, 26-0? You got to start Wolford, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it seems like pretty much anyone on the Hotshots offense is probably going to be one of your safest starts of the week. Yeah. Not a knock on the Express, particularly since they are playing at home, but it's just hard to not start a team that gave up 26 points and scored 0. So my prediction, of course, for this week is going to be Arizona 30, Memphis 11. Arizona just looked too dominant. Like you said, really no weaknesses that we could see in their win against Salt Lake to drop this road game against the team that was shut out last week.
Yep, I think the game will be a little bit closer than that. I think because the game is in Memphis, they weren't necessarily good. I think Arizona will come in flat-footed since this will be their first road game. I think Arizona will win, but it'll be 24-16. Again, despite Arizona's great start, I think they're going to come in looking down on them. However, that offensive talent for the Hotshots and the questionable play calling by the Express really gives Arizona the upper hand for me. I think Arizona will win, no doubt, but I think it could be closer than people are expecting.
Do you think Memphis will score the first points of the game with the Hotshots coming in flat-footed?
I think it's possible. I definitely think it's possible that could happen.
I think that if Memphis can get in the end zone first, I know I stressed it in the Stallions game talking about scoring first, but I think if they could get in the end zone first and get those home fans going, I could see the score leaning more towards what you're predicting at 24-16.
That's fair.
So now moving to the third game of the weekend, we have Orlando at the San Antonio Commanders, Sunday, February 17th at 4 p.m. This one is going to be on CBS Sports Network.
Yes, it will be. This is the only game of the week between two undefeated teams. 1-0, but still undefeated. So purely based on record, this game should be the best one of the week, and I'm believing that it will be. Both teams only gave up 6 points on defense and boosted some pretty stellar offensive players. If you're not doing anything Sunday at 4, you have to be watching this game because it will be a treat.
And I got to say, I think San Antonio is going to put on a show. They already had 27,000 fans show up to a game where no one had even seen them play, and now they have a 1-0 team in San Antonio, so I'm sure that attendance number is going to be going up, and they're playing what looks to be one of the best teams in the AAF, so if any of those fans have been paying attention, or hey, listening to our podcast perhaps, they'll know that Orlando is going to put on a show there in San Antonio, so I think this is going to be a real slugfest.
I think it'll be a great game. I think that they'll definitely get a lot. I really do think they'll get more than that they had week 1, and I think that'll be great for San Antonio.
Yeah, so speaking of a slugfest, I'm looking at a key to the game here, and that is the pass rush. The Commanders' pass rush got home plenty of times against the Fleet, and Gilbert barely had to deal with any pressure against the Legends. So it'll be interesting to see if the Commanders can bring the pressure and really disrupt Gilbert's progressions and maybe knock him down a rung on our quarterback rankings.
Yeah, but if you don't remember, the Orlando pass rush is just as lethal. Matt Sims barely had time to breathe in the pocket against the Apollos, hence why they only gave up 6 points. These teams are so evenly matched, it's going to be crazy.
Yeah, so...
Big thing for me, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Limiting turnovers. Both these teams had very impressive turnover differentials in the first game. Apollos had 3 interceptions against the Legends. They returned 1 for a touchdown. The Commanders also had 3 interceptions against the Fleet. So really, I just said they're so similar. But whoever wins this turnover battle, I'm putting money down that that will be the team that wins.
Yeah, speaking of turnover battles, we had Woodside for the quarterback for the Commanders. He threw 2 interceptions in the opener. Do you think he's going to bounce back from that?
I think that, he needs to bounce back for that.
Yeah.
But this Orlando defense is really good, and I won't be surprised if he puts up a similar stat line. But Woodside wasn't bad by any means in that first week.
Yeah, the Commanders, they're going to have to finish drives against this Apollos team that put up 40. They put up 40 thanks to the run game, who is a key to the game here for me with Akeem Hunt. He blew up last game, rushing for 73 yards on only 10 carries, thanks to a 31-yard scamper. And if he can find the end zone, which he wasn't able to do last week, but I think he could be doing that this week against the Commanders team that gave up 6.9 yards per carry to Jaquan Gardner from the Fleet, he could really be a dominant performer this game.
Yep. I could agree with you on that one. But going back to Logan Woodside, I got to see how does he bounce back from throwing the 2 picks in the opener. He had a solid game. As I said earlier, he threw for 255 yards, but he wasn't able to put a ball in the end zone, and he threw 2 interceptions on 2 huge drives for the Commanders. Woodside cannot be as shaky against a team as good and as polished looking as Orlando was, because let us not forget, the Apollos did drop 40 points in that game, and if the Commanders struggle finishing drives again, Orlando is going to bury them.
Yeah, they're going to need more than 15 points to beat Orlando. You could beat the Fleet on that, particularly with how they were getting to the quarterback. But playing a team who has great protection for their quarterback and who can hang 40 points in their first ever game, you're going to have to score more than 15.
Absolutely. Finishing drives would be my last key to the game for San Antonio. Biggest knock I had was that they couldn't finish drives. They had multiple touchdown opportunities, but only one finished with a touchdown. They had multiple long drives, and almost all of them stalled out, ending in Woodside throwing a pick in his own red zone, or they'd have to kick a field goal. And again, that can slide against the Fleet, but Orlando looks so good week 1 that I don't see it flying this time.
Yeah, so players to watch here, a player who's going to be trying to stop the Commanders from finishing drives, which might not be that hard, is going to be a cornerback again. He's coming off an excellent game last week. His name is Keith Reiser for the Apollos, and according to that account I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, PFF_AAF on Twitter. They're a great follow if you're looking for stats, like I said, and fantasy info. He allowed a passer rating of just 47.9 when targeted, so he's going to probably be going up against Mikhail McKay, who is a dominant receiver, and I think that that's going to be one of the key matchups in particular for this game, because if Razor can get the best of McKay, then that Commander's offense is going to be slowed. My second player to watch is going to be Apollo's wide receiver, Jalen Marshall. He's the proud owner of the very first touchdown in AAF history, which, if you watch the game, was almost overturned, but that really sweet Sky judge that they had where you could watch her talk over the call in her head so we could see what was going on. She ended up calling it a touchdown, which I do think was the right call. And he should have the opportunity to have a solid game against the Commanders, as their top cornerback will be occupied with that other great receiver the Apollos have, Ishmael Hyman.
Hyman was blazing fast in week 1. They were always trying to hit him over the top, but that didn't really show too much on the... He was only targeted 3 times. He had 2 receptions for 45 yards. But if you kind of watch the tape, they had him running a lot of deep routes. And he's trying to stretch the defense there, and that really opens up everything for Garrett Gilbert.
Yeah, so my next player is going to be on the Commander side of the ball, though, particularly on defense, which is where I think if they're going to win this game, that's where they're going to win it, on the defensive side of the ball. That's going to be Sean Washington. After laying the boom last week on Berkovici, look for him to harass Gilbert off the edge. I think the Apollo's offensive line, probably their weakness is on those tackle positions, so look for him to try to get in and put in some work.
If you are an Orlando Apollos fan, you better start saying your prayers that Sean Washington doesn't have a hit order out for Garrett Gilbert, or else he's going to look like Berkovici again.
Yep.
But just like that, speaking of harassment, Apollos linebacker Terrence Garvin, he's coming off AAF Player of the Week defensive honors, and he had 10 tackles, 2 picks, and he had a touchdown. And Garvin, you want to talk about Sean Washington getting all over Gilbert, I got to see Terrence Garvin being all over Logan Woodside.
Yeah, he's going to be reading Woodside play after play. He's probably going to be covering the tight ends going across the middle, so look for him to either drop back in coverage or rush the quarterback and really mix things up. My first potential fantasy star for this game, transitioning into that, is going to be Akeem Hunt. I talked about his impact on the game and how he could lead the Apollos to victory, but he's sure to make an impact on your fantasy team as well, so I would feel safe starting him this week. And then my second fantasy star is going to be Mikhail McKay. He's playing a much better defense this week, and I mentioned how good the cornerback he's going to be matched up against is, but he got 12 targets last week, and someone with 12 targets is never someone you want to leave on your bench because he's going to get the opportunity to make plays.
Yep, another player that's incredibly deadly, Garrett Gilbert. That Commanders defense may have picked off the Fleet 3 times, but they still gave up nearly 250 yards through the air, and these potential yards are a major upside for fantasy owners. And I highly doubt that the Commanders will keep Gilbert out of the end zone this game, so definitely be starting him if you have him, because he's one of the top quarterbacks in the league.
Yep, so speaking of keeping the Apollos out of the end zone, I do think that they're going to score 27, and my prediction is going to be Orlando 27, San Antonio 17. Now, these, of course, are 2 undefeated teams, and if the Commanders are able to put some pressure on Gilbert, more pressure than the Legends did, I could see them keeping this game close, but I just don't see the less explosive Commanders offense being able to overcome a very dominant Apollos defense. So I have the Apollos taking this victory in San Antonio.
Yeah, you must have been reading over my notes before the game, because we're matched on all 3. You're jealous of that 3-1 record.
I am. I have to follow the master.
This game, if you couldn't tell, I've got Orlando winning this one. 34, San Antonio 27. This game will certainly be the best of the bunch, make no doubt about it. But with that being said, both teams have stellar defenses, so whichever offense boasts a better QB to negate the defense will win. And I believe in Garrett Gilbert and Steve Spurrier more than I believe in Logan Woodside. Straight up.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all there with believing in Gilbert more. Did he throw a pick? I don't think he threw a pick.
He did not. Threw
he
2
didn't throw
touchdowns,
a pick.
0 interceptions. I think he caught
Woodside,
one, too.
Woodside had 2 picks, and Steve Spurrier seems to really, really like the plays seen out of Gilbert. So I like that connection, the quarterback-coach connection there.
Yeah.
Finally, our final game of the week is Atlanta at San Diego, Sunday, February 17th at 8 p.m. That game is going to be on NFL Network, so you can tune in there to watch it. And this is the only game with 2 teams both looking for their first win.
Yep. Professional football is back in San Diego, and if that doesn't get you excited, it sure is resonating in San Diego. Expect San Diego to show up in big numbers to support their Fleet and give them that extra boost that they need to make this team 1-1.
I think that home field advantage is really going to play. I know people are still very jealous about the Chargers moving to LA, so San Diego is sure to show out for that game. My first key to the game, however, is how good is their new starting quarterback, Philip Nelson. After a poor performance from Berkovici, Nelson will be starting this week for the Fleet. He didn't play great, but he was thrown into the game in the 4th quarter when they were down, so I would expect to see a slightly better performance from him after a week of practice as the starter. On a side note, I would like to say I feel like Berkovici might have had the worst week for a football player in recent memory. Not only did he almost lose his head, he got sat. So I feel bad for Berkovici.
Yeah, if I could take you back in time, though, or Philip Nelson is kind of the surprise to me to be the starter for them. Because if you look at the preseason game that we were talking about earlier, Alex Ross was the one that impressed me the most out of the fleet. He was 11 of 14 for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion, but they're opting to go with Philip Nelson, who they only let throw 2 total passes in the preseason game. So we don't really know anything about this guy, and I think it'll be kind of interesting to see whether or not he surprises us.
Honestly, if he plays like he did at the end of that game, I wouldn't be surprised to see Ross come in there and take command. The Fleet might have a trouble at quarterback on their hands, but who knows? We might actually end up seeing Alex Ross come in and play.
Yep. Who knows? He had a really good preseason, and I would like to see him get some snaps.
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about both teams being 0-1. So first key, the victory for me is whose offense is going to bounce back. Both teams were only able to score 6 points in their season openers with fairly little offensive success. So whoever finds their offense first, whether that be at practice or the first half of the game, they're going to have something that the other team has not had yet. So whoever finds it is going to be, again, I'm going to put my money down that whoever finds their offenses first, whoever scores the first points is probably going to win that game.
I talked about big plays leading offenses to victory in this new league here, and I think you're absolutely right. I think whoever gets in the end zone first, maybe a nice 50-yard bomb, something like that, that's going to give their offense the spark it needs to keep going for the rest of the game, because right now, neither of those offenses really look very explosive.
Yep. And another thing I'm looking at is the Fleet coaching experience, because Kevin Coyle didn't impress me in that first game against the Apollos. If there's anything that the Fleet certainly have an advantage over the Legends, it's got to be coaching experience. Mike Martz was a former NFL coach. He's got a Super Bowl ring, too. And Kevin Coyle is in his first ever season as a head coach coaching professionally anywhere. And that inexperience really showed last week against the Apollos. And Mike Martz, he's got to be feeling good with the football IQ that he's got over Kevin Coyle and us.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at because Mike Martz might have that edge there because he knows how to bounce back from a loss, being a former NFL head coach. He knows what to say to his players. Coyle has never coached as a head coach professionally anywhere ever. So it might be a really slow start to the season for him as he gets his feet under him and as he figures out how to motivate his team after a loss in which they scored only 6 points and let up 40.
Yeah.
So I think my key for Atlanta to try to win here is, can the Atlanta offense that showed up on their very first drive come back? In the first drive they ever took in their first game, it was maybe the one good thing for the Legends in that 34-point loss, and it was that first drive that they had. It went for 67 yards, ended in a field goal, but Matt Sims was 4 for 4 for 52. So if those positive flashes can return, this might actually turn into a pretty close game.
Yeah, I remember that actually from watching the game live. I was keeping notes on my phone to talk about later in the show, and the first thing I wrote down was Matt Sims looks really good, Garrett Gilbert does not. And boy, did that flip-flop.
That changed a little bit.
But it just goes to show that the scripted plays that Kevin Coyle made for the Legends last week really did wonders, and it worked well. So if they can score first, maybe the Fleet kind of shake back under their shell and they're not going to be playing as loosely as they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of things to look out for.
Yeah. So players to watch now. You have the first multiple players to watch, actually. It's a whole line, so go ahead there.
Yeah, the Fleet offensive line, they're terrible. They've looked terrible, and I hope they get better. They've just let their quarterbacks out to dry. They have given up at least 5 sacks in both their Week 1 and their preseason game. We saw what they let happen to Berkovici 3 minutes in to the nationally televised game on CBS. They tried to get him killed.
They did.
They just need to improve flat out. And if they're going to let Atlanta hit Berkovici, or not Berkovici this week, Philip Nelson, as hard as they hit Berkovici, you might be seeing Nelson on the sideline, whether he be benched or hurt.
Speaking on the other side of the ball now, we have JT Jones. He is an edge rusher for the Legends, and he had a very solid game against the stellar Apollo's offensive line. So look for him to break through the Fleet's much weaker line, and he might be the guy who puts Philip Nelson in the dirt quite often. So those are the players to watch. Now let's move on to, they can't score you any fantasy points, unfortunately, so that's why we're going to move on to our fantasy stars now. My fantasy star for this game is going to be Fleet running back Jaquan Gardner. The Legends gave up 121 yards and 1 touchdown on the ground against the Apollos. So if with some help from his offensive line, Gardner is about the best play I could find from this game.
That's true. I think I found a better one. I'm going to, first time in AAF history, or potential fantasy star is a tight end. And I have had very little information about the tight ends until right now.
That's true. There's been almost nothing about any tight ends.
Yeah. Well, the Fleet tight end, Gavin Escobar. Escobar was the leading receiver for the Fleet, and he was a tight end. So if you need a tight end and he's available, by all means, Gavin Escobar is the way to go. And there aren't many of these guys to go around, but he's currently 5th in the entire AAF in receiving yards, so you definitely got to start him because he's getting the most targets out of anyone on the Fleet right now.
All right, so that wraps up our fantasy stars. We're going to move on to the predictions, and me personally, I gotta take the edge here. We've predicted the same games for these last 3, and I need to edge up on you. So I'm going Legends 17, Fleet 14. I need to pick differently, like I said. So this is my here goes nothing game. I think the Legends have a chance to be able to get it together for this week, and I think an unproven Philip Nelson is going to be let down by his O-line like Berkovici was last week. And I think if the Fleet have to throw in Ross now and move on to their 3rd quarterback in just 2 weeks, it's going to be a struggle for them.
That's true. I've got the Fleet winning by 3 points. I get them winning 17-14. Neither team appears to have a particularly good offense, which doesn't make me think this game will be very high scoring at all. But I think that coaching experience by Mike Martz and the narrow loss to the Commanders, as well as home field advantage, is really going to drive the Fleet to really want to win this game more than the Legends, flat out.
All right, well, there you have it. Those are our predictions and analysis of the games coming up. I think we're going to have some great games this week, whether it's because the teams are really good or they didn't have very good weeks last week at all, and they're going to have to be fighting for that first win. I think we're going to once again see some quality football action. Now it's time to move into the fantasy football talk part of the show. So we're going to start with our plugs for who you should plug into your lineup and feel safe with this week. Go ahead, Derek.
All right, number 1 plug for me. I got Iron wide receiver Quentin Patton. Week 1, he had 107 yards against the Express, and he's going up against another team that in Salt Lake that gave up a lot of passing yards to John Wolford and Rashad Ross. So I think that Luis Perez's stellar game that he had against Memphis is really going to translate against Salt Lake, and I'm going to say that Quentin Patton's going to be the main recipient of that. So if you're looking for a good wide receiver, look no further than Quentin.
I'm going to go ahead and say that my plug of the week, I mean, really, if you look at anybody on the Hot Jets offense, you should be feeling safe, but I'm going to go with Jarrell Presley at running back. He had a great game last week. He nearly amassed 100 total scrimmage yards and had a sweet 30-yard receiving touchdown on a nice little hook play there, so look for him to show up again this week.
And my second plug it's kind of weird. I got to go with Memphis running back Zach Stacy. I know that the Express didn't score any points in week 1. But Zach Stacy was the bulk of their yardage, 12 carries, 58 yards. He averaged 4.8 yards per carry. And I think that Mike Singletary is going to see this, and he's going to want to give Stacy more carries. And for a fantasy owner, more carries equals more points. You got to plug Zach Stacy into your lineup because he's the only one getting yardage for the Express.
Yeah, Zach Stacy is that one probably safer play on that Express offense that had 0 points. So I do agree with you there. Now on to the passes for the week, and I'm going to have to give my pass to literally any Stallions wide receiver. With the quarterback uncertainty and the fact that the Stallions tend to spread the ball around, a lot of their wide receivers had catches, and them playing a defense that had a shutout last week makes these wide receivers a very dangerous start, and I'd only start one of them if you absolutely have to.
Yep, my number one pass has got to be San Antonio Commanders quarterback Logan Woodside. Woodside had 255 yards, but he did throw 2 interceptions in his game against the Fleet. But this time he's going up against Orlando, a team that only gave up 6 points. They posted a really good turnover differential. I just think that there's better options at quarterback than Logan Woodside. But if you're in like a 6 or 8 person league and you need to start him, I do understand the predicament. And then another Commanders player that I really think that passing on would be a good thing would be Kenneth Farrow. He did get their touchdown, but other than that, he only had 37 yards. Aaron Green outperformed Kenneth Farrow on half the number of carries. I just think that there's other options better than Farrow again, and I'm really just looking down on this Commanders offense this week.
Yeah, they are not in a great situation against one of the top-rated defenses in the AAF right now. And now, time to move on to the players who are sure to bring the pain, to be an electric factory on the field. That's going to be our power players for the week. So my power player for the week is Rashad Ross. I'm going with another wide receiver, just like I did last week, but for very good reason. He's a 100-yard receiver who's playing a defense that, like I've said, has already given up 100 yards to a wide receiver last week. He's a no-brainer. Put him in your lineup. John Wolford's on fire. He's going to be throwing bombs to Ross down the field. Play him.
Yep, and speaking of Rashad Ross, I got to go with the Rashad Ross's best friend. John Wolford is my power player. He's just absolutely fantastic. 275 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he's going up against the Memphis Express, the team that laid the big goose egg on the scoreboard. There's just no way that John Wolford lets me down. Knock on wood. But he's got to be the power player if he's available, because no one expected him to start. You got to scoop him because he's going to be an incredible acquisition for your team.
We're going to be really embarrassed if the Hotshots lose this week, because pretty much what we're saying is if you start the Hotshots team, including their defense, you're probably going to win your fantasy game this week. But yeah, if they lose, we're going to look like idiots. So anyway, despite the chance of us looking like total idiots, we can't wait for week 2 of the Alliance to kick off after that extremely successful week 1. Don't forget the first game is an early one at 2 p.m. on Saturday, the only game on TNT, and I'm crossing my fingers for a predictions victory this week so I can tie you up here, or maybe even take the lead.
Oh, so that's what you're looking forward to.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I care about.
Yep, good luck with that.
Thanks. I'm going to need it. So, thank you for listening. We love you all. Enjoy another epic week of AAF football, and peace out and play football.
Thank you for listening to the AAF Analyzed podcast. Follow the show on Twitter at AAF Analyzed, and feel free to contact the show to have your questions featured on a future episode. And don't forget to check out the show on all other platforms such as iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube.